Hey there. Welcome to the If Money Were Easy podcast, the show where we teach you how to expand what's possible with your money. We are your hosts, Beth Storjohann
and Neela Hummel,
certified financial planners and co-CEOs of Abacus Wealth Partners. Today on the show, we are talking about how to have a compassionate start to the new year. Welcome, Neela.
Welcome, Beth. I feel like I'm already at ease thinking about this as a topic.
So this is our kickoff to season 3.
Yeah.
Can you believe
2 seasons in the bag? Thanks to everyone for coming on this journey with us.
We're experienced podcasters. Who would have thought?
You've always been an experienced podcaster?
Not
now
always.
I'm an experienced podcaster.
Now you are. I haven't always been experienced. I had to fumble my way through it. And now I think based on the intro that nobody's going to hear that mess up on, that now I also am still working my way through it. So
we're going to be compassionate with ourselves.
We are. And that's okay. So it is, as of right now, it's January 23rd. This will air end of February. So we'll keep that in mind as we're talking to folks. But Nee, how is January going for you so far?
So January, I'm just going to go on record and say that January has had a little bit of a bumpy start.
This is like,
I've had a few images come through my social media saying, hey, I tried I did the 14-day trial on January and I'd like to unsubscribe because things are not going great. So I'm in Los Angeles and part of my city is still on fire. We've been in fires for the last several weeks, which has been a little bit of a shock to the system.
Yeah.
And it just kind of feels like there's a lot going on, right? There's been a lot of transitions. There's been a lot of change, right? We have a new administration. We've had these, kind of natural disasters. There's just kind of a lot happening. Plus, I think there's also just a lot of angst that can come with New Year. Of like, this is going to be my year of XYZ. And I think we end up putting so much pressure on ourselves that combined with the fact that it's been a rough start can feel kind of like a tough start.
Yeah. Yeah. How are you doing fire-wise with the fires and like family, clients, friends, like quick check in there?
Lucky our house made it. My parents' house made it, but it was very close. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people, both clients, we have a team member, and just a number of people in my community who lost their homes and or have been displaced. So it's been a big just hit, I think, to LA. And at the same time, as hard and as scary as it seemed, I've also just seen the city come together in such a beautiful way. So I think there's been, me, I'm an optimist forever. And so even amidst all of the toughness, just seeing everybody come together has been really beautiful. And I was telling a team member earlier, thinking about the restaurants in our city, and running a restaurant is a very hard thing to do. It is it's a low profit business typically because it's just there's so much high overhead.
Right.
And so many restaurants that made it through the pandemic now are getting hit again. And yet they're also the first ones who are raising their hands and are like, how can we feed people? Come in for a free meal. Firefighters, like, we got you covered. And so just trying to encourage like all of us to do our part to support the community that's supporting the community also. So like bought lunch for the entire office from one of the restaurants that's supporting first responders.
Oh, that's so cool.
Which is fun. So
that's really fun.
Yeah, I was like, I can do this. I have an expense account.
Yeah. There you go. Using your power, using your influence. Neela also wrote a fantastic blog with a ton of resources for fire victims. So if it's helpful for you, if you're listening or anybody that you know, we'll link to it. Check it out. We also have a webinar that Abacus did recently as well for resources. So, and we're putting together a pro bono day. It'll be coming soon. So
I love that.
Doing our part, doing what we can to get through. And, I'm 2.5 hours away in San Diego, but Nee's been in the thick of it. And maybe we'll even share some of the photos from the office. Just so people can.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
But, as we were looking at this as our series opener, I like this, you came up with this as our topic, and how Why did this resonate with you as the way of kicking off this season?
I mean, it's 3 weeks in and we've had a presidential inauguration. We've had LA is on fire. We've had a lot of transition and change and like the term emotional flooding has come up and like just kind of like in my sphere recently and like but it's mostly like and I think the emotional flooding of like as like it feels like a lot is happening like social media and media wise, right? There's a
Yeah.
lot of like anxiety and fear or anticipation, depending on where you fall on political spectrums and where you're at in your life. And even living in the country based on LA in terms of there's also like the crazy weather on the East Coast right now as well.
Right.
But I think with everything going on and seeing like the meme that you mentioned, seeing the one that I shared yesterday, which was like, I'm doing this new challenge called January, where I just try to make it through each day of January. And I was like, I like that. Usually it's dry January, but we're just trying to get through. I just felt, in order to kick off this season, it would be a miss on our part not to pause and talk about like we closed up season 2 with this power of gratitude, knowing that we're kind of heading into this season of change and transition over the next 4 years, reminding ourselves also just like, the holiday season, wanting to have that gratitude, but kicking off a new year, how can we start it from a more compassionate way versus like hit the ground running?
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend this morning. She was like, just got back from sabbatical and she was like, I wanted to hit the ground running in business and get going. She's like, and then I rolled my ankle falling off a curb and I literally hit the ground walking. And now I sprained my ankle and can't do any of my walks. And that's how it's going for me. And I was like, that's like, so I think it's like one of those things where it's like we have this goal of like, we're going to new year, new me. And we have all these aspirations that we like do while we're kind of like cozied up for the holidays of how we're going to launch ourselves. And then the year hits and LA's on fire and like the East Coast is frozen. And then there's a ton of stuff coming out of social media. Like, should you even be on social media right now based on all the changes? So I'm like, you know what? Let's take a beat.
Let's take a beat.
Take a beat and talk about, what's happening, acknowledging the change, acknowledging transition.
Yeah.
Acknowledging that we're humans.
Right.
That can, enter a stress cycle based on what we're exposed to. And talk about what are some ways that either like we get through it, how are, what steps that we're taking to control things and steps that we advise our clients on as well, especially from the financial aspect when there's a lot of anxiety right now around money in different ways as well.
Yeah. When we think about like acknowledging change, there's a piece of that is also like acknowledging the external change and also acknowledging the change that we can control. Because I think sometimes when there's so much external stimuli happening, there's this out of control feeling. And as human beings, like we find safety in control.
Yes.
And so when we think about what is possible, obviously I'm like, well, I can't keep Los Angeles from being on fire. That is not, that is not in my job description, nor could I do that if I wanted to. But what can I control? And, you mentioned that blog article. I was like, okay, I can either go and volunteer or I can try and put together like a resource that is based on like my profession and see if I can help. And so that felt like that was actually such a cathartic exercise because I was like, I feel like I can help the community in my own way.
Yeah.
And so then just thinking about your own life and just being exposed to all the stimuli, like what are the things that you can control? And I think a lot of the things that when it comes to finance, people think that it's something that you need to put a lot of time into when it really isn't. It's so much of the best financial moves and the tips that set people up for success are a few things that you plan on doing that you automate and then you kind of check out. Like it actually doesn't require that much time and attention.
Right.
So thinking about the things that we can control, like what are the things you can control? Okay, so new year, there are higher 401k contributions, right? Look at your 401k. How much are you contributing? Take a look at your mix of investments. Like, is that the right mix for you and your goals right now? How's your emergency fund? Is there, do you want to be contributing to that? There's just little things that you can just take a look at and feel like you're making progress on that probably you can sit down and make some great moves in 30 minutes.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's really important in terms of like the micro tasks. So your 401k, for example, what is the contribution limit for your 401k? Make the adjustments, to increase it or max it out if possible. readjust your allocation based on the allocation that you've previously set that is best for you. And that's it. So
Yeah.
never mind the noise that might be coming out of what's happening in the market and the fear that could possibly be out there of changes to come or what interest rates are going to do. Like, if you have worked with a professional and or you have an allocation that is set that you have already determined is the best for you based on your risk tolerance and time horizon towards needing access to the funds, there's not really anything else that you need to do. I mean, as long as you're set to rebalance on an automatic basis, like you're good.
Yeah.
You're good there. And
Right.
that could feel almost too easy for some people, right? Like your stress
Right.
cycle might want to, like, you might be drawn to the noise, you might be drawn to the news, and then figure out, like, oh my gosh, what do I need to do? And you kind of get spun up. But
Yeah.
allowing yourself to sit in of like, okay, I made these adjustments, like and kind of giving yourself that space to exhale. So often we just don't allow that space.
Yes. I like that you hit the point of it almost seeming like not enough, right?
Right.
Some people almost like need it. And I
Yeah.
think confusing like needing it for like being addicted to it is an
Mm-hmm.
interesting divide, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
think you've had clients who came in who were individual stock pickers, right?
Yes.
And then you're like, and they're like, no, I check the market like all the time. And then the natural question is that serving you? How do you feel
Yeah.
after that? Because it's basically you're sending your body into this like stress state. You're just like
Mm-hmm.
pumping it full of cortisol,
Yep.
which they say, when you check, even when you check social media, it
Yes.
hits your brain with cortisol. And
It
you're like,
does.
is this good? Or am I just like, have I pre-programmed myself to do this? But it's actually something, it's not helping me.
That's exactly it. And that's what one of the things that's come up, in terms of like all the New Year research and happiness and finding this piece is this idea of like the doom scroll, which is on social media and on the news, right? Even if you
Yeah.
think that you are doing like, okay, I've checked these boxes on these easy tasks for my finances and things are done, I put it over here. Like you end up on these platforms, which is your way of distracting yourself, which actually
Right.
does induce fear because it's like hitting a slot machine. Like you don't know what's
Yeah.
coming. And the
Right.
algorithm might feed you puppies and kitties and all of those warm affirmations, but boom, like they have advertisements now. And whatever whoever is paying for whatever advertisement, those are popping up, and whatever,
Right.
you can't control the news feed either that's coming in those headlines that are meant to get you to click through. And that's giving you like that's hitting you with cortisol. It's hit the fear, like you're just jumping in immediately. And so the thing in terms of like managing your stress cycle and managing, what you can control, the thing that I've started doing and that I encourage others to do as well is like starting to understand and recognize like how do you feel when you're
Yes.
scrolling?
Right.
Like how do you feel after you're done scrolling too? So there's like, and there's we all love a good Instagram, TikTok video and all of those things. But if you really set a timer of like, I'm going to scroll for 5 minutes, and like
Yeah.
check in intentionally with yourself, like, do I feel better or worse after,
Right.
10 minutes? Understanding and noting how you feel, you might be surprised because so
Yeah.
often those are just habits now. We're on autopilot. People are
Yeah.
picking up how many times do you pick up your phone? Just
Oh my
like,
gosh.
when you're in the elevator, when people, in the bathroom, whenever you
Yeah.
don't go anywhere without this thing because you can't just be. It
Right.
can't be that easy, right? It can't be that
Right.
easy. So we complicate it for ourselves.
It's funny that I I talked to my therapist at different points, obviously. And when we were talking about being able to like turn my brain off, she's like, do you ever sit on the couch and just not do anything? And I like laughed. I was like, do people do that?
Yeah.
And she's like, yes, Neela, people do that. And I'm like, great. Okay, that is something that I can work on, right? And just
Yeah.
like sit without a phone, without something on the TV, without an agenda, and just
Yeah.
like sit. Like that is something that I am trying to do more of in 2025.
Yeah. But it's so uncomfortable when you
It's
start. It's
so
actually
uncomfortable.
it is easier for me to pick up the phone and make myself more uncomfortable on social
Yes.
media and doom scrolling whatever the Wall Street Journal wants to feed me in the moment than me sitting in silence on the couch to be like, well, how long am I here? What do I
That's
do?
it. Yeah. What is the
And
plan? What is
yeah.
next?
Yeah, and you just let stuff come up, and that's it. And then what? I got to reflect. It's uncomfortable. That's the uncomfortable work.
It is uncomfortable.
I was talking earlier. I was like, doing the work is actually very tiring.
Yeah.
but it makes you better and more aware of like your habits and the things like
Yeah.
that, like how we end up in the stress cycle due to things that we can't actually control,
Yeah.
and how external factors are influencing our stress cycles and
Right.
making our lives less enjoyable.
Yeah. And, you know, the idea of putting the timer, right, on
Mhm.
social media or whatever it is, it's taking control back. It's
Mhm.
putting some intentionality around how you spend your time. So if you ever look on, you know, if you take your phone and you do the screen usage, the app
Yeah,
usage, if you look at that and you see how much time you're spending on some apps, are you getting the value out of those, out of that time? In
yeah,
the same way we talk about, if you take a look at your budget and you see, my favorite thing at the end of the year, I know I'm a monster, is to like look at the last year's worth
oh
of
yeah,
expenses
yeah,
and be like, okay, did I get the value out of these expenses, right? Did I spend
absolutely,
so much more on something that I didn't really get the value for? Or like, oh, I only spent this on that. That's something that's super important to me. That's something that I want to do more of next year, right? So
yeah,
travel, for example.
yeah,
And you can do the same thing with screen time usage, right? You're like, oh my God, I spent how long on Instagram? I could have literally read 12 books if I
right,
hadn't done that.
yeah, exactly.
Is it serving you? And it's again, the intentionality versus being fed stuff that you're not going out and looking for necessarily.
Yeah, you don't have control over what's, you can try and filter your feed, but with the business that is social media, it is a business, it is an
Right.
advertising platform. Like you don't actually have control. It's not like it's not like when you pick up an actual book, right? And
Right.
then you're reading, you have control over what's happening there. But that component of it, the intentionality and the timer, I mean, I still pick up my phone sometimes, that weekly Sunday report, that alert. I'm like, ooh, okay.
Yep.
You know, and it's kind of like a gut check, because then I look at that too. I'm like, how many hours in this area, or how many hours in total? How many phone pickups per day? I'm like, why do I need to pick up my phone that much? And so, you know, just like even the number of pickups sometimes of like what's happening. And I think that's really understanding the tide to our stress cycles, especially right now as we're starting the year, because there is the stress of new year, new me. There's all the New Year's resolutions of like
Yeah.
all, you know, all of the stores they're out of the holidays now. So they're either feeding you Valentine's Day or, you know, all your workout gear, because you're supposed to, you know, obviously start your year off looking
Drop those
fabulous. Yeah,
pounds.
drop
What
the
have you been
pounds.
even
Right.
doing
Yeah.
over the
Yeah.
holidays?
What are they
Yeah.
pushing? So anything that you're opening right now is about some change that you need to make for yourself to be
Yeah.
better, or something that you should be angry about, or something that's basically going to cause fear into your life. Like there's not a lot of peace that you're
Yeah.
going to get from the internet at this point
Right.
in time. So,
Yeah, I'm curious if there are any retailers out there who are like, you know what? Just be you. You don't have to change anything.
yeah,
You don't need me. You don't need anything that I offer in this store. You do
yeah.
you, girl.
It's Patagonia. Is that Patagonia? No, maybe.
Patagonia is as close as we get,
That's
right?
basically
But even
it.
then, they're like, Neela, the sale, it's happening.
Yeah.
You sure you don't need that sweater?
You shopping here helps us to do good. So you're
Yeah,
doing good
right.
by spending your money with it, which is not mad about that one. Good strategy.
I do love that you talked about that with New Year's resolutions, because I think it can be it's such a high pressure time of like, this is the year of X. And
Yeah.
it almost invites these huge changes that oftentimes we just set ourselves up for disappointment with these grandiose things that maybe aren't even connected to something that's important to us. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm going to lose 20 pounds. It's like, maybe instead of that, I'm going to be like, maybe I'm going to stop eating chips after 10 p.m. That's where I'm
Yeah.
going to start.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's so interesting. You know, it's always like these like action oriented goals that we're setting for ourselves. And, you know, I'm just coming off of a week in this life planning training. And so I think it's really important. I went through like this activity of, it starts off with these three questions of, you know, you do journaling prompts of, you know, you have all of the money in the world, you're financially secure, how do you spend your time? I'm like, oh, this is fun. Like, what would I do? And you start
Yeah.
dumping everything down of like, yeah, I would do like I got all the money, like all the dreams are out there. And then it goes, you know, that's like your happy space. And then, you know, next one is you've heard from your doctor, you have 5 to 10 years left to live. You don't know how you'll die. You know, will be peaceful and painless though. You have all of the money you need. How do you spend the next 5 to 10 years?
Mm,
And then I'm like, okay, well, so you got like a constricted timeline. So then you're taking
right.
your brain dump of your life and you're moving it down. And then from there, the last one is you have 24 hours left to live. What do you spend your time doing? What do you regret not doing? What will you miss?
Yeah.
And then you're brain dumping, which so then I'm sobbing obviously because I'm like totally anxious because my kids are like front and center, right? The thing that
Yeah.
came up, all of these New Year's resolutions, all
Mm,
of these things you want to accomplish, and the thing that comes out is like, I went back to my kids, right? That was what came up
yeah.
for me, and I love Brian obviously, but I'm also like the thing that like kind of came up with the cohort. Some people were like, I love my partner, my significant other, but we've also had like 10, 15, 20 years together. And like the things I'm going to miss, like my kids are like, they're still at the ages like our
Mm,
kids are, they're missing
yeah.
those opportunities with them. Like I know my spouse will go on to be okay. And so I'm like, oh man. So you talk about like all these goals, and those are all still really important. And we don't want to live in this 24-hour period. But it was a really interesting reframe of like, okay, so these are the things that I would miss with my kids. These are
Yeah.
the things that I would want to do with them. Like here, what would I be
Mm,
truly upset about not doing? Right?
yeah.
What would kind of like cause that heartbreak? And like that's it. That's how you kind of get and distill down to like those are the things that
Yeah.
are important to you
Right.
that like you probably want to take more immediate action on. So I was like,
Right.
so after I picked myself up off the floor,
Right.
from that visualization, you start to like kind of craft like your ideal days and weeks and months and years and start to like kind of create this vision for your life. And so it was really interesting though from like a New Year's. So it was like a different approach to it starting this in January, going through this of like
Yeah.
have all these goals for myself, but like, oh, actually like it's this thing over here that's important. And my
Right.
goals are kind of like not trash, but they're
Right.
not truly what's most important because
Right.
this over here got me to that space. So I don't know. I thought it was a different, an interesting perspective and kind of reframed like this whole like. I mean, I've never really been like this new year, new me. I really feel like
Yeah.
it's more of like a slow evolution. I love having goals and I like to crush goals, as you and I both do, if we're being honest.
She says crush. I say decimate, you know.
Yeah, whatever. Either way. But being mindful of like this evolution of like, okay, like these things, like who are they for? And like what are
Yeah.
we like what kind of system am I operating within? Who am I proving these
Right.
things to versus what's truly going to be the most impactful over time? So
It just laser focuses you on true priorities,
yeah.
right? There's like plenty of priorities that people have that also might feel like other people's priorities that
That.
you've somehow taken on.
Mm-hmm.
But you doing that work is like, no, 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 this is it.
Yeah.
And so this is going to be the fulcrum and everything's going to be designed around that, which I just like get chills thinking about.
Yeah.
You know,
And
that,
it's scary because you have that and you're like,
right?
well, if I'm not going to act in line with this, well,
What are we doing here?
what are we doing here? And so it's a
Yeah.
little bit of like shining this light there and you're kind of like, oh, okay. So, but that's the stress that I think I want in my life. I
Yeah.
want to be stressed out about like living my true authentic values and the things that are important to me. I don't want to be stressed out about like what the news is throwing my way. I mean, I have empathy and compassion and also like doing my part. Like we've donated to certain areas for the fire. We're doing certain things and taking action
Yeah.
in our community. But beyond like controlling what I can control, like I've really taken this stance of like, what's the next right step for me in my life? Right.
Yeah.
I can like, I've opened up Wall Street Journal probably every day for the last 4 days. I'll like glance at a headline and I'm like, nope, not today. Like, can't,
Yeah.
like I'm aware of like what's happening, but I'm getting my news from different sources because I just know from the way like the certain headlines are being written. I'm like, it's not a good absorption tool for me right
Yeah.
now. But I
Not
think
serving you at the moment.
not serving. But
Yeah.
I stay up to date in like my own ways. I have Substacks that I'm getting I'm subscribed to that are giving me my news, and I feel good about that.
Yeah.
But I think the same thing for social media, figuring out like what are the things that are true stressors. I think there's a lot of fear, and like even with that fear that's coming, that comes with transition and change. I mean, especially right now in our country, fear wise, again, it goes back to controlling what we can control, like
Yeah.
doing your part. I've spoken with friends who are like very concerned in a variety of areas, but from a political climate.
Yep.
But again, we can't control it all. And so what can
Yeah.
you do in your communities? How can you show up for your families, your people, your clients, your customers? And what can you do in that way? That small step there in
Yeah.
your circle versus, kind of wringing our hands on the things that we can't necessarily control.
Yeah. I think we also, thinking about that, especially as it relates to markets, people get very nervous during transitioning times, particularly with, presidential
Every time.
transitions.
Yeah.
But like just anytime there's something big, people get spooked about what are the markets going to do.
Absolutely.
And the reality is that nobody knows, right? Like you can go back and see what different, talking heads, what different economists, what different bank heads, what they thought the economy was going to do. And honestly, they're all wrong.
Right.
And the occasional one is right, literally just by luck, because the reality is nobody knows.
Right.
That there's so many different factors that go into what the stock market does, individual companies, individual countries, tax policies, economic indicators, employment numbers. Like there's so many pieces. And so we can't control it. But going back to what you said about, do you have the right investment allocation that lines up with what you want your life to be, with your goals? That's the part that you can control, right? Yep. Don't try and time it. Don't try and guess where it's going to go. You might be right once, right? But you're probably not going to be right twice.
Absolutely.
So just don't, it's not worth monkeying with it. I think the other thing I would add is, as we talk about New Year's resolutions, I feel like they're kind of out, because I think people are seeing that like they're just not helpful. Like you end up, you don't achieve them, and then you're down on yourself. And so this reframe from New Year's resolutions towards intentions.
Yes.
And then exactly what you were talking about with the life planning work. Actually, New York Times did a great article on basically like intentions over New Year's resolutions. And they interviewed Dan Harris, author of 10% Happier.
I love him.
He's so great. And he talks about how making something meaningful to you is a great way to increase the odds that you're actually going to do it. And so you talking about like, if your priority is to spend more time with your kids, and you know that like, if you had 24 hours to live, it would be with your kids. I better believe that this coming year, that's how you're going to be investing your time and resources.
That's it. Yeah. And that was like, that's, I think, the important thing. The financial side, I think, is really important. You're right. And we see it now with we see it with clients. But whenever there is like a big world event of any kind, that is when clients come in. And that's our job, is to provide that reassurance, and we're literally paid to provide the reassurance and to remind clients why they're invested, and in terms of like where their allocation is and how it works for their plan. And that's okay. The anxiety and the fear is absolutely okay. The other side of the coin also is like, if you do take action on that fear, it's usually impulse, and it's without plan or thought as to when you will get back in or recover. There's an immediate step or action that happens because of the fear, but that next step of like, and then what? So you'll take this action, and then what? And then when would you get back in the market? What would you wait for? Or, why?
How would you know it was time?
How would you know? And I think that's the thing to keep in mind, is if you do feel compelled to take an action that might not be aligned with like the plan that you've originally committed to for yourself, like, and then what? Like, how would you then, what would be your next step after taking that action, and making sure you're writing it down and have some sort of accountability on it, and making sure that you're okay with consequences of that action, up or down. Would you be playing the what if game, or like only if game, or, shoulda, woulda, coulda game, like making sure that you are comfortable with any repercussions of that as well.
Yeah. I think it goes back to, feelings versus actions. And you can validate the feeling of, I feel really scared right now. I don't know what the market's going to do. I'm afraid that the market's going to drop 30%. That's a real fear, right? And the real fear behind that is like, I'm not going to be able to do what I want to do.
Right.
I'm afraid I'm not going to hit my goals. That's the real human fear. And then the action is the thing that you're like, okay, the fear might be real, but the action actually doesn't change that fear. The action is like a perception of control, but it's actually not, because you're not done, right? Like you take, and you're like, oh, I've done an action. And then you know what you're doing the next day? You're watching the market.
Yep.
Oh, should have waited another day. Oh, glad I did it today. But what about tomorrow?
Yeah.
So that feeling doesn't go away. Yep. And the action that you take can actually backfire so much more than you might fear.
Yeah. It's a way of actually keeping yourself in that stress cycle. As opposed to like acknowledging that fear, being peace, talking with like a trusted advisor, understanding and kind of processing it out, taking action on that fear can actually keep you in the stress cycle longer than you intended to be.
Right. So if you want some action items of things that can make you feel like you're in control from a financial standpoint, check out what you're doing from an automatic investment standpoint. Make sure that you have enough cash is invested and you've got enough cash set aside. Take a look at how you spent your money last year. See what changes you want to make going forward, and set any other intentions. But you don't need to do that much to feel like you're making progress on your finances.
Yep. I think that's it.
I think that's it. And go easy on yourself. Progress over perfection.
One step at a time.
Yeah. Hopefully the, things have mellowed out in February, but
yeah. Hopefully this is just like, not totally relevant to anybody and doesn't land.
Yep. Hopefully it doesn't land.
Hopefully this doesn't land for all of you and everybody's feeling great and at peace. That is my hope and wish for everybody, is that you're all able to just pass on right by this episode because it's not necessary.
Right. 2025 will be a great year, whether you learn 3 languages or not.
Exactly. It will.
There you go.
All right. Thanks,
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of If Money Were Easy. We hope you're walking away with some fresh insights, maybe some inspiration, and some ideas to apply to your finances, life, etc.
If you're excited about these conversations, we would love for you to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube. It's one of the best ways for you to support the show, and that way you will never miss the latest from us.
We're also turning If Money Were Easy into a community, and we'd love your help building support. So leave us a review, share your favorite episode with a friend, and we'd be super grateful.
We are also launching a newsletter. There you will get the episode updates, behind the scenes content, all of the bloopers from Neela and I, and what we are reading, watching, and listening. You will find the sign up link in our profiles.
The bloopers are choice, just going to say. They're really, great. Really great. Please connect with us on Instagram. We're at Mary B. Storj and Neela Hummel, CFP.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.